Hi, I'm Pete Summers, PeteSummers.com. In this video, I'd like to show you the technique of placing the rubber and temperament mutes for piano tuning. These are rubber mutes. You'll get 4 of them with your tuning kit. They may come in this form where you need to put them together, but you just push the wire handle in. Now these are used to block off the outside strings of each trio of strings. The fundamental principle of tuning is you can only have 2 strings vibrating at any one time, otherwise you'll confuse your ear. So these little puppies are used to block off the outside strings, and we'll place one of them up here, let's say on middle C. Now, in your earliest experiments with learning to hear the beat, the vibrato or wah-wah-wah sound that 2 strings make when they're out of tune, you'll just place one mute to the left of the trio of strings, in this case middle C, and you'll hear that rough sound that indicates string is out of tune. We're going to assume the middle string is in tune. Whether or not it is, it makes no difference for this exercise. We want to remove that vibrato sound by moving the tuning lever up or down, depending on what's required, till you get rid of that sound. Now you can lower it again. Hear it come back. Now, in this case, just remove the mute and put it to the right, and remove the vibrato beat sound from the other unison string. That's how you place the mutes for tuning unison strings. You can put one on each side if you're tuning. For example, if you were tuning a 5th for practice, you would need 4 mutes. And you can place 2 of them on the upper note of the 5th, and 2 of them on the lower note. So you would have those 2 notes with only the center string sounding, and you could adjust a 5th. Now I want to say a few words about handling the tuning lever and the position of the tuning lever. The 1 or 2 o'clock position is the correct position for the tuning lever, so that when you push down on it, you're raising the string. When you push back up on it, you're loosening the string. And if you're a left-handed tuner, you might want to reverse that and go to the 10 or 11 o'clock position. But if you do that, remember that you're reversing the direction of the string also, so that in this case, pushing up is going to raise the pitch, pushing down is going to lower it. But most people, including some left-handed tuners, will prefer the right-handed position. Handle the tuning lever by not yanking on it, but small incremental movements, and just bring the string up or down slowly. If it's an old piano like this piano where there's some rust on the strings, it's always a good idea to start every pin by lowering the string just a little bit so that it breaks any rust bond there might be between the string and the bridge along here. Now the temperament mute, which is a gang mute, is used to block off all the unison strings in the 2-octave temperament span, and you do that simply by taking a thin bladed screwdriver and push the felt in between trios of strings leaving a loop over the center string, so the center string is free to vibrate. Go all the way down the scale this way until you reach a point where, on this piano, being a spinet, the upper bass notes extend up into this area, which on a larger piano they would not. And they have only 2 strings, so at this point you simply loop over like so, leaving the outside strings of either set free to vibrate. Now you're ready to start tuning by using the tuning fork to set the top note, and in the section on setting the temperament we'll describe that process in more detail. So that's how you use the string mutes. And Summers. In this video I'd like to talk about tuning the treble notes and the bass notes up by perfect octaves and down by perfect octaves from the temperament. The temperament having been set in previous videos, I've left or replaced the temperament strip, so I'm still getting only 2 strings vibrating at any given time. Now sometimes you can tune, if you've tuned the temperament, you have all the temperament unison strings perfect, which is not likely, but if you do, you don't need to replace the temperament strip, but I find it much easier to do it that way. Now essentially, tuning from the temperament is simply tuning each unison string up the scale to the temperament to transfer the temperament up into the higher octaves. And the same principle, perfect octaves down through the bass, transfers the temperament into the bass notes. Now, to do this, you want to place your mute on the first 2 strings, or the first strings of the first note up the scale that you're wanting to tune. In this case, on this piano, it is what? D. So, we're going to tune D from D. Now, remove the right temperament, or the right rubber mute, place it against the right of the next trio up, bring up that unison, now move the mute over to the left, bring up the left unison, now you notice that your mutes are in position for the next note up. Switch the mutes again. And your mutes are in position, roughly, for the next note. Now on these spinet pianos there's not much room between the hammers and the upper bridge. On a taller upright or a grand piano there's much more room for placing the mutes, but even on those pianos, when you get up to the upper notes, those are the most difficult notes to tune. They're difficult because it's hard to find a place to put the mute to keep the hammer from hitting it, and you're going to have more trouble tuning these high notes because the beats are so fast that it takes a better sense of pitch to reliably tune those. There's an old tuner's rule of thumb, which is if you can't find a perfect octave in these higher notes, the last octave, leave them slightly slightly sharp. They call that stretching the octaves. A lot of people do that just routinely from about A on up. Personally, I think you should try for as perfect octaves as you can, but if you can't get a perfect octave, leave it a little bit sharp, because most people hear those notes as flat to begin with. So tuning the bass is a similar thing. You're just going to tune down the bass in perfect octaves from the temperament, just as you were doing going up. Place the mute to the left of the two bass strings. You've got the perfect octave. Remove the mute, tune up the left string. Go down to the next note and do the same thing, and so on. Clear down the scale. Always tuning in perfect octaves all the way down. When you get to these deep bass strings, you won't need a mute at all, because there's only one string per note. You'll also run into a thing called, believe it or not, inharmonicity, which is a scientific principle that when you stiffen a string, it causes a distortion of the partial overtones, usually called partials. And it makes them go sharp. So even though the fundamental note on these strings may be correct, they might not sound correct because the partial numbers. In this video, I'd like to show you the temperament round, starting with C above middle C, then going down to the C 2 octaves below middle C. This will be the temperament range. I've left the temperament strip in position from the previous video so that we have all outside strings of each trio of strings in the temperament octaves are now silenced. Only the middle string of each trio being free to vibrate. We're going to start by using the tuning fork to set C above middle C, which I've previously done for simplicity's sake. Now we'll start a round of perfect octaves and slightly flattened fifths, according to the chart shown in volume 1, starting with your reference note, tuning middle C to be a perfect octave. Now we'll drop down C below, and on this piano that has 2 strings in the higher bass instead of 3, as many pianos, larger pianos would, you'll need a rubber temperament strip to lock off one of the unison strings. Bring this string up to a perfect octave to middle C. Now you have 3 octaves, or 3 notes, the 3 C's and the 2 temperament octaves in tune. You can start your cycle beginning with C below middle C and tune a flattened fifth to the G above. The fifth to have a very slow beat, a very slow wave. You can almost sway your body to it. Technically, it'd be 3 beats in 5 seconds if you have a stopwatch to time it. Probably easier is to count 2 beats before the tone decays enough that you can't really count beats. Now the next note, using the G just tuned, will be a perfect octave to G above. The next sequence is flattened fifth from G to D. Now we're going to tune another octave. In this case, we have to go downward in order to stay within the two temperament octave range. We'll need another rubber mute. Now using this tune, we want a flattened fifth to the A above. Now another octave, A to A. A perfect octave. Now we'll do another fifth, which will be from A to E. Now another octave, again going down the keyboard to stay within the two octave temperament range. The next fifth is from E to B. To bring the note up just slightly, get it to a perfect fifth, then make it just a tad sharp so that the final movement of the tuning lever is down rather than pulling it up. That will help set the pin so that it stays in position better. The next octave will be B. Obviously what's going on here is we're just tuning around, as shown in the chart in volume 1, of perfect octaves and flattened fifths. And so on, clear around until you come to your final fifth, which will be F to C. Now, I'm not going to go through the entire temperament. Summers, and in this video I'd like to show you how to practice the tuning exercises in volume 1, how to set perfect unisons, perfect octaves, and slightly flattened fifths. Those are the 3 skills that you need to know to be able to tune the entire keyboard. The first 2 are fairly simple. The flattened fifths are a little more complicated, but it's nothing that you can't get if you give your attention to it and spend a little time practicing. Now, tuning unisons perfectly simply requires that you block off one of the strings, or both of the strings if you haven't tuned the middle string. Let's do that on C. C above middle C here is a good note to practice that on. You tune the middle string to a tuning fork or other reference, to handheld tuner, whatever you have. Now you've tuned the middle string. All you want to do now is bring up the unison strings. So all 3 strings are sounding without any beats, that is, they're all at exactly the same frequency. All unison strings across the entire keyboard have to be tuned so that each string of the series of strings is in tune to the other strings in that series. Down here there's only two. Clear down here there's only one, so the mutes are not necessary, but in the treble and tenor sections of the keyboard you're going to have 3 strings per note, and all 3 of them have to be exactly the same pitch. Now once you've practiced that skill and learned to tune all 3 unison strings, the next skill you want to develop is learning to tune a perfect octave. In this case you'll need 4 of the rubber mutes, 2 of them on the low note, and 2 of them on the upper note. Now we know the C here is in tune, so we're going to tune the middle string of C, middle C, to the middle string of the C above. Done, bring up the outside strings, just the same as you did on the other one. Now you have an octave, perfect octave, that is an octave with no beats, and you cannot have any beats in an octave, because that will really stand out to people's ears. Your octaves have to be perfect. Even the fifths, there's a little room for variation, but on the octaves there isn't. The octaves have to be right because people notice flat or sharp octaves more than anything. Now the next skill, number 3, is learning to tune flattened fifths, and again you'll need 4 mutes to do that. Let's use middle C as an example. G above. If you hear that ringing like that, you've got the mutes and they're too tight and it's holding the string. This one definitely needs it. Now, tuning a slightly flattened fifth, 3 beats in 5 seconds, or 0.6 beats, which is slightly over half a beat per second. That's pretty hard to count, but if you hear 2 full beats before the tone decays, that'll be close enough. If you got a stopwatch, you can time it 3 beats in 5 seconds if the piano sustains that long. Good grands will sustain longer than a small spin, of course. So you want to tune the upper note, always the upper note, to be just perfect. Now back it down just a little bit till you just hear that slow. And then again, pull up the unisons, make them perfect. There you have a flattened fifth.